me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Cello Chat. This time with me is Alison Bazala Kim. And Alison, we've crossed paths a number of times over the years. And it's just kind of like you have a variety of experiences and background with music that I know is going to fascinate the listener, and I can't wait to ask you about. But first things first, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Nice and early on Friday morning.
All right, terrific. All right, well, yeah, I want to dive right in because there's just a number of things I can't wait to get your perspective on, like the variety and the specific ones too of teachers that you've studied with. You must have a very interesting perspective on their approach. But if you would lead us to how your studies, like how did you get started on the cello in the first place, and how did you end up studying with these various big names in cello pedagogy?
Well, I was a little bit of a late bloomer. I originally started on piano, a little bit of piano with Mrs. Bach was my teacher's name. No relationship, I think, to the the great composer. And that was fun, but it didn't really stick. I think a little disappointing because my grandfather was a concert pianist and a teacher.
Hmm.
And then later on in sixth grade, I had a wonderful teacher also in elementary school who played the accordion and would have us listen to classical music and teach us about theory and all kinds of things. She was really terrific, and I thank my school teachers. They're the ones who got me into cello. In sixth grade, my teacher, his name was Mr. Sharp. No kidding. He came into the classroom and he had a cart of instruments, and I'm sure a lot of kids got started this way. And I saw the cello and who wants to try? Of course, I raised my hand, and then at the end he said, "Who would like to, play cello?" And I'm, waving both hands, practically jumping out of my chair, and that was sort of the beginning of cello for me. And I was very fortunate. I had lots of wonderful music teachers along the way that just sort of lifted me up. And my music teacher in middle school, Mrs. Rawls, was amazing and encouraging. And the funny thing was, I had just started in sixth grade, so I really had no business being in the middle school orchestra. And my dad had this notion that I should be in the orchestra. And she saw her opportunity and she said to him, "Well, if your daughter takes private lessons, then I will allow that for her to sit in the, back of the cello section." And so he did that, and I just took off. So that was, thanks to these teachers, these early teachers. I'm very, very grateful to them, or, I wouldn't have found my thing, that makes me so happy, which is playing the cello. And then later I studied I was a member of the National Symphony Orchestra Youth Fellowship Program, and that's where I stayed with David Hardy, who's the principal of the NSO. And from there, I was going to a bunch of summer programs, Brevard, Interlochen, Tanglewood, Encore School for Strings, and was inspired by all those experiences, decided I want to go into music, and landed at New England Conservatory for my bachelor degree. So there I studied with Colin Carr and then later Fritz Mogg, which was very interesting. And that was a contrast in teaching styles for sure. But that was very interesting. And then I was in the New World Symphony in Miami Beach. And then I decided to go back to school. Went to the Eastman School of Music where I stayed with Paul Katz. And he transferred to Rice University. So I just followed him down there and finished my master's at Rice. Then I taught at Michigan State University's community music school, and I was the director of their chamber music program at that time. And then later on, I decided to get my doctorate, went to University of Maryland, came full circle, and stayed with David Hardy again. So
Nice.
it's interesting. That was a very interesting experience to work with the same teacher at two different parts of my life as well.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting.
So, yeah.
Well,
So,
now I know this is a big question. I know it is to summarize, but what are some of the main takeaways from your teachers that just kind of stay on the forefront of your brain when you're teaching or playing?
well, I think some of obviously the foundational technical stuff I got from David, which is, how to really shift smoothly and beautifully and, create, music from, just the fundamentals of technique. I think, Paul Katz also did that with me as well. I mean, they all do, all of them worked with me on the fundamentals. You just can't ever get enough of that. Um, and I think, interpretation, you just gain so much from each one, just like Paul Katz being in the Cleveland Quartet and just having so much, insight into, interpretation. And also he's such a warm, wonderful person. And just, that connection, I think also between student and teacher is so important that if you connect with them, then you can relate to what they're telling you, what they're expressing to you, and how he would talk about the music, how he would, provide insights into playing music that would, inspire me, I think, and get me into understanding more about the composition or how I wanted to approach the piece that I was working on. So I don't know. That is a bigger topic. I don't know if I'm being specific enough, but
Well, I'll ask a little bit more specifically,
yeah.
like you say, going to Mog, for example, was
Yes.
quite a contrast.
Yes.
How was his approach different?
Well, when I studied with Fritz Mogg, I knew even at the time, I felt that I wasn't really, in my mind, I felt that I wasn't really ready for him because um, he was so knowledgeable and he had so much to offer, but I was a little young and restless. And I just wanted to dig right in and have fun and just play, and I knew that, and I know he would shake his head a little bit about working with me sometimes, because he was very, specific, but that specificity was exactly what I really needed at that time. So I look back on it and with a lot of gratitude, and really treasure that I got the opportunity to work with him. Um, I still think I would have benefited even more from studying with him if I was doing my doctorate, with him or something, because he was so detailed and in depth. And some of that was just, I think, as an undergrad, was a little over my head at that time.
Interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I never crossed paths with him, but the materials that he created, his
Yes.
his exercises and all sorts of things clearly show a mind that understood kind of how to get to the root of solving a problem and tackling it from different directions and such, which kind of leads me to another question. Sometimes when people go from, even if they're equally brilliant cellists, equally brilliant teachers, there can be just aspects of technique where you go to one and they say, "Oh, you need to do more of this."
Yeah.
And you go to the next one and they say, "Oh, no, 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 you need to do it this," and they seem to be contradicting each other.
Mm.
Did you have any situations like that?
Boy, probably. It's funny because I remember a very early example of this before going to college, like when I was little. And it was, I had one teacher's, very square left hand. And I went to a summer or a workshop, and the teacher said, you should be on an angled hand. And, of course, really neither one is right or wrong per se. Now I know this. These are both useful position, ways of approaching the cello. But I remember being terribly confused when I was younger and wondering, it just made me wonder, is one right? What is one wrong? And I admired them both. And it was a really, um, that was a very stressful moment for me actually as a young person. But then I think later you realize there's so many ways of teaching, schools of cello teaching, And there can be room for a lot of different approaches, and you can learn from a lot of different approaches if you keep your mind open to what the teacher has to offer you. So I think it was a little jarring for me to go from, honestly, from Colin Carr's studio to Fritz Maug's studio, because Colin was very, sort of freer, and he was pursuing his solo career, and so I would get like a bunch of lessons, and then he would be traveling and so on. And so I was a little bit left to my own devices, and then when Mr. Maug comes by, he's old school, my way, the highway kind of thing. And that was took me a while to get used to that. And it was interesting when I finally did get sort of on track, as it were, with him. I remember going to him and saying, so what are your fingerings and bowings? I think it was for Bartok Rhapsody or something like this. And he said, "Oh, you can do it yourself now." It was, I'm done. You're fine. Go. And I was like, no, 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 no. My recital's coming up. I need all your markings. And so he just was very, that was the way he was. And, you just had to roll with it. And I think that's something that I think I benefited from, all these different perspectives. And I
Excellent.
think if you have the open-mindedness to just take what the teacher has to offer you, and just really listen to them and really try what they're saying, you can find what works for you and what doesn't. And then afterwards, you can do what you want. That's why I tell my older, more advanced students, I'll tell them the same thing. I said, all I ask for you to do with the information I give you is try it, really try it. And then if it's not working, let's find something else. So I try
Nice.
to share that with my students as well.
Excellent. All right. So you have quite a variety of teaching experience and a very successful studio of your own. So some students, I mean, as we know, students vary enormously. Some students respond very well to structure, and in some ways, the more structure, the better.
Mhm.
And others really want to, it's like they're very interested in the cello insofar as it's either this repertoire or, this sort of playing. So how do you structure your approach to lessons, your curriculum over time?
That's such a really important question, because we're all individuals, and when you're working with individuals, each person's going to be different. They're going to have a different mental approach, different inspiration, motivation, like what you're talking about. And so for me, I don't think it works to always have the exact same approach. I start with that. I have a method, I have a way of doing things. But if I feel that it's not working for the student, or the student comes to me, sometimes they will come to me with a piece that they really want to learn. And if it's possible to work it in, I'll work it in, because that's more important. This is what they want to do it. And I'll find a way to help them. Now, an extreme example of this would be my son, who wanted me to teach him the Shostakovich cello concerto. He's 12. His sister just played it to get into college, and he's not ready for that. But I found a few spots that he could do. And so we worked on that. I was like, oh, this works. This goes to this position we're currently working on. And so I was able to teach him just little spots in there, because that's what he just so badly wanted to do, that. And then of course he tried some of the other spots, and I said, we'll just have to wait. You'll get there someday. So I mean, I think you try to go with them, and you don't want to always, sometimes, I don't always agree with what they pick, but you try to help them where you can, and you want them to stay inspired, and they know what excites them. You don't want to just dismiss that either. So I
No.
guess I don't know if that answers the question, but I will, look for other things. I'm always looking for new materials too,
Yeah.
for me as well, because teaching the same thing, I'm good with teaching the same repertoire in the sense that I'm teaching it to somebody new, so it's never the
Right.
same.
Right.
But I also like teaching something new, and I'm definitely looking more to expand, for example, my repertoire of female composers and BIPOC composers. Because I don't know a lot of them, and I'm starting to build a repertoire of other materials, and I think that's pretty exciting for all of us. So that's one of my personal goals.
Excellent. Well, and I think our students, they can tell when we ourselves are lifelong learners
Yeah.
and not just like, okay, I'm done. Now all I do is teach and I don't learn myself. Like, no, 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 no. I mean, to me, that's one of the, when I hear of somebody who feels like they've got imposter syndrome, kind of a thing. It's like, but you are learning alongside them, share
Yeah.
with them what works for you and has gotten you as far as you've gotten, and these sorts of things.
Learning from your students is a very true thing. I can be working on a box suite that I've been playing and working on and teaching for years, and suddenly discover something that a perspective of a note or a phrase that I just hadn't thought of before, and that excites me. And I go, oh my gosh, to my student, if I hadn't been teaching this to you, I wouldn't have discovered, I wouldn't have thought of this, whatever little, it might be a little thing to someone else, but for me, it's a little nugget of something I knew that I just hadn't seen before, and it's always a delight. So, um,
Nice.
our students do, they kind of can inspire us too,
Oh,
and
yes.
and if you're working hard to help them, I think that will make you a better teacher. So some
Yeah.
of my students who are maybe I'm struggling a little bit to communicate some idea, I'm having to think of more ways to communicate that idea. And then if I do come up with something else, then I'm like, oh, great, I can share this with the next student. So
Nice.
that's for me also inspiring. It's not just um, the same old,
Yeah.
you know. I,
All
I
right.
I think
Well,
that wouldn't
so
be exciting at all.
I think so. Now, what about with respect to chamber music? You are an active chamber musician, and like you said, you direct a chamber music program. Um, so Paul Katz was not your only teacher that was also an active chamber musician, and chamber music itself, I think, is it's requires so much of us being, I mean, we can't lose ourselves entirely, of course, but there are times when you just kind of have to plug into somebody else in a way that I think a lot of the rest of the world is missing out on, the things that we have to do to be successful chamber music players. So, do you have a curriculum there that you can share as well?
Well, I am a former director of a chamber music
Right.
program that was at Michigan State. So I'm not currently
Sorry.
working a director of a chamber music program, but I do still play chamber music. And I agree with you. It's one of the most rewarding things you can do as a musician. And I do encourage, especially my advanced students, to find music groups, participate in various chamber music programs if they're available, if they can find a group. That's always something that I think really, yeah, it's something that is just so great, and you just can't experience it unless you do it. And I have some adult cello students who play in chamber music programs as well, or groups. And I'll support them in their lessons with learning the music. And of course, I'm always telling them you've got to know the score. We all as chamber coaches know the importance of knowing the score, because it's the one time you really need to know. Well, I guess if you're playing sonatas, that's chamber music. You need to really
Yeah.
know what the other person is doing, and I tell them it's like being an actor on stage. It's one thing to know your own lines, but you need to know the other person's lines and how you're going to
Right.
respond to what they say. It's
Right.
not just you say something to them, they respond, and you respond back. So that's that kind of interaction with the other musicians, um, that you just it's so wonderful actually, and that kind of communication with each other on stage, and then of course you're also communicating with the audience as well. We don't leave them out of the equation, but they don't come in till the last minute. But we think about them, and we
Yes.
want to bring them into that world that we've kind of found and created. So I love chamber music, and I
Yeah.
hope to do more and more of it, honestly. I miss it.
Excellent.
You sometimes when you get out of school, it's hard to keep that going. And so fortunately, I have a neighbor my neighbor who moved across the street from me. is one of my colleagues in one of the orchestras I perform with. So
Nice.
we started a chamber music group.
Yeah,
So
that's good.
that's
That's a
been really, really great. Yeah.
fun coincidence.
Yes.
All right. So I know for particularly, I think the younger people, string players watching this, the importance of ASTA is sometimes hard to convey until they've experienced it. But this idea of connecting with as many of the like-minded individuals who are interested not only in playing a string instrument and teaching a string instrument, but spreading the opportunity to play strings and learn strings as far and wide as possible in this country. I think ASTA has it's hard to overstate how much good along these lines this organization
Yes.
has done. And you've been very active in ASTA. I just wonder, do you have thoughts along these lines as well as to what the organization has meant for the industry? I mean, not the industry, the field, I should say.
Well, for me, I think it's really just been, having that community, that, that string playing community, that teaching community. And it just strengthens what, to be alone and to do it on your own is hard. And to be part of a community and to learn, from people such as yourself. I've been to some of your wonderful lectures at the ASTA conventions, and I've learned so much, from you and from others. I think we inspire each other, and that then is, we come back loaded with ideas and great, inspiration. Then, we can share it with our students. And, the students can also participate in ASTA, especially if they're in college level. They can join chapters and stuff. And we would love to have young people and students participate. I mean, that's really, it's about handing down what we do in music is really very personal. And, it's about handing down knowledge from one generation to the next, really. Um, and it's not all through books. It really isn't. We have to, and that sort of networking is very, very important. And I feel like, yeah, for me, what drew me into ASTA in particular was that wanting to belong to that community. And I think for me, it's been one of the best choices I ever made. And through my chapter, my particular chapter is the Maryland, DC chapter, and we are particularly active in the private studio teacher aspect of string teaching. A lot of chapters are public school, which is wonderful too. I mean, I applaud that and I welcome that. Um, and I remember when I was serving as president of our chapter, we would bring in amazing artists because, I live in the DC region. So I was able to tap into some great artists coming in, giving master classes, lectures to the teachers and students. So all kinds of good comes out of ASTA, and I even just putting together an all cello orchestra for celebration. We like to do these things, and I think that was very popular. Kids really like doing that. So some things for the kids, some things for the teachers, and just trying to keep ourselves, yeah. I mean, I think there's nothing like inviting people in. Here's this opportunity. Come join us.
Great. Well said. That's exactly the sort of thing I was hoping they could hear. And actually also, it's like the chapters that help the private teachers connect as well, because sometimes they can be such hermits, I mean,
And
it's
I'm not a
hard.
hermit type, so you're right. You do kind of get into your own world, and especially during the pandemic, which we were
Oh
talking about
gosh.
earlier. You felt so isolated, and I think coming out and just communicating with your peers and learning what they do, and learning that maybe some of the the travails that you have in your own life they share, and you're not alone, and we all sort of trying to learn more and be better teachers for our students. And I think that if that's what you're looking to do, ASTA is the right place to go seek that kind of education. I mean, it's really further education for me. I would go to violin master classes,
Yeah.
And as you know, at first I was like, "Oh, I'm a cellist," but I'm, I said I'd participate, so I'll go. And I learned a lot. And it
Yeah.
was, you can learn. It's not all about cello. It's just music, and you learn from the other instrumentalists as well.
Yeah,
So I
definitely.
really value that part of uh, that organization and that part of my life. So I appreciate ASTA a lot.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
Okay, now you have gotten to perform internationally quite a bit as well. And I mean, please feel free to talk about any of those experiences, but the one that I definitely want to ask you about, you were the first American to play in Sarajevo after the war there.
Yes.
That
Yes.
you tell about that. That has to have
Okay.
been amazing.
It was really amazing. It was, of course, a very sober time. Um, and the connection, the reason I was there was my father, who is a former U.S. Diplomat or Foreign Service officer, was working there to establish a new American embassy in Bosnia. Previously, we had lived in the former Yugoslavia when I was younger, actually. So my dad had the language skills, and he was working there, and he was living in post-war conditions where they had curfews and the lights had to go out, everything had to go off, and I remember him telling me he was sleeping on a sleeping bag on the floor in his apartment. Um, and my mom wasn't there yet, so you know, that was kind of those were the kind of times that he was up there in. And he said, it would be nice to have you come and play music here. And at the time, I was studying at the Eastman School of Music, and I thought, well, gosh, who's gonna go with me? I need a pianist. And Paul Katz said, look, why don't you ask Jean Barr, who was the head of the collaborative piano division there? And of course, as a lowly student, I was pacing the hall trying to, work my courage up. And he saw me, he said, have you asked her yet? Of course, he had already probably asked her first, but, I hadn't thought of that. And then he told me to pull myself up by the bootstraps and ask her, and I did. And she agreed to go with me, and I'm forever grateful to her because it was quite an adventure, and she was an adventurous person.
Hmm.
And we went there and we played at the the National Theater, and the piano in the National Theater, had been sitting there for 4 years, neglected, nobody taking care of it, nothing. Now they tuned it before the concert, but something was wrong with the pins,
Oh,
and the stage itself was springy, I think, from all the, who knows, temperature changes and what have you.
hmm.
So as we're playing, like this or this, the stage was bouncing like a little bit like a trampoline, like just slightly, like,
Yeah.
this. And it was shaking the piano as well. And random keys were going out of tune during the
Oh,
concert. So it wasn't like a little out of tune in the upper register or something. It was crazy. But nonetheless, we did the concert, and
hmm.
afterwards, I think that probably the greatest compliment I've ever received. Somebody said to me that the concert lifted her spirits.
Hmm.
And for somebody who's been through 4 years of a terrible war to tell you that, you just realize that what you do has meaning. And I think for me, I've always carried that sort of very deeply because sometimes, you feel, you feel unappreciated or whatever it might be, but then, you think of that and you think, wow. And I'm not in any way comparing myself to him, but there was a cellist, the cellist of Sarajevo, whose name I'm not sure if I can pronounce correctly and remember correctly, but I don't know if you remember that story. He would go and perform outside, um, after somebody had been, shot and the waiting for bread in line for bread. And you just it was so moving. I did see the spot where he had been. Um, so and then as you're walking down the streets of Sarajevo, they had also there you'd see red paint splashed on the pavement, and those were called Sarajevo roses. Those were to designate people who had been killed, um,
Hmm.
randomly. So that's something, we don't see that here, and we don't, God forbid. Um, And so that is a very sobering thing. On the other hand, there was still a lot of beauty there. It's in a beautiful country. Um, there were some blown out windows and things like that still there. I had to go in there on a Hercules C-130, so I did not fly in on a commercial plane. I was a little scared, I was just like, oh gosh, here I am with the military. And, my dad said, well, did you sit on a flak jacket? Because I had to sit on a flak jacket, in case somebody fired, randomly. But by the time I got there, that protocol was gone. So it was a really interesting experience, I have to say. But people were nonetheless very warm, welcoming, and appreciative. And I played also at the I-4 headquarters, International Force headquarters, and they didn't have a piano. They had a keyboard. But, it didn't matter. I just think, I felt so grateful to be able to hopefully, um, give something hopefully lovely or beautiful or inspiring to, the soldiers who were there. Um, and even in a old hotel with a keyboard, we still it was very meaningful, and that kind of experience really makes you treasure what you do. And I felt um, that was my little thing that I could do that was positive. Yes, they had a keyboard. And just to play the officers and soldiers who were there, in the Peace Force, um, that made me feel like I was contributing something, hopefully, in a good way to maybe the morale. And later I connected with the son of one of the officers. He was also a student at Eastman, a undergraduate. And it meant a lot to him that I could tell him I had, met his dad and he was looking very well and everything. So, what a coincidence, and, but, that was a long ago, as you can imagine. But, I went back a couple years later and did another tour. And that was a little bit, that was more peaceful times, but, still, interesting, experience. Still, just thinking about, safety, that kind of stuff, more than you would here.
Mm.
And especially in my situation, we at one point, we my mom was in a position where we had to have two armed cars. So I felt quite, important being in this, like, armored car, and with the guards and so on. But most of the time it's not that uh, fancy. But that was an adventure. It really was. Both of those
Wow.
times were real adventures. Yeah.
Wow.
I
Wow.
feel
That's
very
amazing.
lucky as a human to have um, been there. But it's sad. War is sad.
Hmm.
And it was a beautiful place. I had been in Bosnia very young, when I was a young child, just for a visit. And I remember my parents telling me about the Olympics happening in Sarajevo and stuff like that. And then to go back and see destruction, and still such a beautiful place nonetheless. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would like to go back. I would like to go back
Hmm.
now that things have been, so much time has passed.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
would be interesting. Yeah,
Wow.
maybe one
Well,
day.
thank goodness we have this amazing art called music. I mean, I'm a big fan of all the arts, but there's something about music that just can just go straight to a person's soul, and that connection you must have felt with them, because the person who for whom who gave you the compliment afterwards, I don't know if they always can put themselves in our shoes when we're performing, but we feel that like what you said, when the audience is in there, and that human connection through this amazing art. Yeah, it must have been magical.
It was, and I think, you don't forget something experience like that, and meeting people who've gone through what they've gone through, and you can't even imagine, what they had to contend with, even though you know about it. But that's knowing about it and having gone through is completely different.
Mhm.
But I think, that makes what we do, I think it is so important because we are really, yeah, we were really reaching out to each other and experiencing something together. And you look at something, you can appreciate it, but if you stop and listen, I think you appreciate it in a whole different, deeper way. And we are
Nice.
in the businesses of listening, and I think that makes us really, we're receiving something
Yeah.
and not always, so it's give and take. And that's what I
Excellent.
love about chamber music too, like you were saying
Yeah.
before, is the, or orchestra, you
Yeah.
are you're speaking, but you're listening. You
Right.
have to do
Right.
both,
Right.
and you
Y-
do it
y-
at the same time as well.
Yeah. Even like some concerto soloists, you can tell they are thinking like a chamber musician with the
Mhm.
rest of the orchestra. And yeah.
You can really tell when when they are just really, one with the orchestra,
Hmm.
and they're really involved in the whole experience of the music and not just their own part. I think that makes for, that's the greatest thing, fortunate to work with some amazing musicians like that. Yeah.
Here, 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 here.
Yeah.
All right. So, Dr. Bazala Kim, upcoming projects in 2026 concerts. What are you up to?
Well, I mean, I play in some of the local DC area orchestras, and one of them, the Annapolis Symphony, is going to be, I think it's premiering a work by composer Jennifer Higdon, has written a cello concerto for Julian Schwartz, and he's going to solo, and I can't wait to be part of the orchestra and hear that piece for the first time. And he's
Wow.
played with us before, and actually he's come and done an ASTA event for us, so. I'm really looking forward to seeing him. He's terrific. So that's one project I'm particularly excited about. Um,
Nice.
and then, just generally, my daughter is also studying cello performance at University of Michigan, and so, well, this summer, a little bit closer in, we're, taking her up to. Um, she's a summer program in Maine, and then later we're going to be taking her back to Michigan. So I follow her, adventures and her
Right.
concerts and stuff. And I'll be teaching, and I may be getting more and more back into uh, ASTA. We'll see. We still, I'm gearing up this weekend. Sorry, I'm talking about what's happening right in front of me more than next year. It seems like that's how I tend to just see what's right
Sure.
in front of my face. But we have a ASTACAP event coming up on Sunday. So that for me is, been getting my students ready for that. I don't know, do you have ASTACAP in your area
It
or?
hasn't really caught on a regular basis.
Okay.
It's interesting how there are several states where it is a big part and parcel of what that state is about with the string solos to get the feedback and advance through these levels. And it's a little bit of a mystery to me why it hasn't caught on in other states where I mean it surely would if somebody just kind of got it going with some momentum.
Yeah, I mean, it does take a dedicated team of volunteers to keep
Mm,
it going, and there's a lot of work to put the events together, but I think it's
mm,
so beneficial and worthwhile, and the kids have something to really aspire to every year. Um, and it is, sometimes it's difficult, but they allow, if it's too much and the students not feeling quite as prepared as they should be, they can do it for comments only, and it's
mm,
still you get the experience of getting up
mm.
there and playing for someone, and you get the feedback. And I think that is more important than the certificate or anything else. So that's nice to get. I think the actual just having to, go through the experience of playing for people and then getting the information, the educational experience, comments back, the feedback. Um, that's what I really value about it. The rest of it's nice, it's nice to get the certificate and be part of that program. But yeah, that's something we'll do that next year too. And
Great.
I guess we'll see if I'd like to get some guest speakers and so on out here for our chapter. Not currently the president, but I'm still would like to see our chapter bring people in. I think that is always exciting.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll see what happens next.
Well, in 2027, the ASTA conference is Chicago, which is just a very short stint from here. So
That's right.
I'll keep my fingers crossed that we'll get to cross paths again there.
I've got my eye on that one. I would
Oh,
love to
good,
go. So
good.
yeah, I would love to see you there. That would
Yeah,
be amazing.
terrific. Excellent. Outstanding. Well, thanks so much. It's been really a joy hearing your thoughts and just history with the this wonderful instrument that we play. And um, I know I have so much fun doing this series. Not only do I get to visit with people I wanted to visit with anyway, but the ability for this to be inspiration for particularly I think the young students watching and getting to know more and more about the field of, I mean, just like what you say, we're all individuals, just fascinating and different cello players around the country.
Mhm.
I find it very inspiring.
I think, sometimes we forget how lucky we actually are. We get to do what we really love and we get to share it. And I think, it's not always easy. That's true. But nothing worth doing is. So I think, we are we have a good life and
Yes.
it's not always easy, but it's very worthwhile. And it's those moments where if you can touch somebody who, especially if they've been going through a hard time, I think you really feel like that's you don't always know when that happens. So that's the performing part, but also as a teacher, um, you never know how you're affecting your students as they grow. And, hopefully you're contributing something to them as people as well as musicians, and hopefully a lifelong love of music. I always want them to go listen, whether, to their phones, but hopefully in a real concert. Um, and that will be our future audience too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Well
the
said.
audience is very important.
Yep.
So, yeah, we're a whole community. Musicians, teachers, audience, we need each other.
Yes. Here, here.
Yeah. So,
All right. Well, thanks
thank
again
you for
and more
having
power to
me.
you.
Oh,
All
thank
right.
you. It's been great catching up with you as well. And thank you so much for inviting me to your program. It was really fun.
Thank you. Entirely my pleasure. All
All
right,
right.
everybody out there, we'll meet back up the same time next week. Take care.
You had me at